Good morning once again. It's great to have you. My name is Justin. If we haven't met, I'm one of the pastors here, and it's great to have you on this Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day officially to those of you who I've not said that to. Happy Mother's Day via the internet to my mom, who always watches, and my mother-in-law, Nancy. Happy Mother's Day, and to Kay Wadsworth. Those are the only three people that watch online. So good to have you three. We didn't mention this before, but if you are a mom, on your way out, we have created a little work for you. It's fitting for Mother's Day, but we have created a bouquet buffet. And so you can go on your way out and create your own bouquet and do it just the way you like it. So just a teaser, your kids are going to be making something for you that's going to be way worse than what you can make for yourself. So I highly recommend you taking advantage of that. And then there's a little photo booth and all that. You can take pictures and do the thing. So we are in the book of Jonah. And so if you're here as a guest, you are coming at a great point in this sermon series because we are at the midway point of this 5-week series. And this passage is kind of the hinge upon which the story turns. And Pastor Markel and Pastor Jordan are going to wrap up this series for us in the next 2 weeks. I'm actually going to be in Indonesia next week on a Compassion International trip. So please be praying against the spirit of dysentery for me. I appreciate that. And but this section of the story is, like I said, kind of the hinge upon which this whole story turns, and it's the hardest part to believe, right? And so as Pam already read in chapter 1, verse 17, it says, "The Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." Now, if you have been in church for any amount of time, you certainly know the story of Jonah. You may know it exclusively in felt, and kind of the guy gets eaten by the felt fish and that whole thing. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, the Lord bless you, because it was a very confusing thing as a child to figure out why God would send a big fish to eat this guy who we thought was the good guy. Turns out by the end you realize he's not the good guy in the story. But even if you did not grow up in church, certainly you have heard of the story of Jonah and the fish and all of this. And so I want to pause, as I have done briefly in my first 2 messages in the series, and address the challenge of a verse like this that says, hey, this guy Jonah was running from the call of God. God brought a storm onto the sea on the boat that he was going on, brings a storm. Jonah tells the sailors, the only way to calm this storm is if you throw me off the boat into the water. Couldn't have jumped himself, needed to be picked up and thrown. And he does so. The storm is calmed, and he descends to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, where he is then swallowed up by a very large fish and lives there for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, there is a moment, I think, if we are not just kind of glossing over the story and kind of going, yeah, it's church, they say lots of crazy things, which is true. I think if we can stop for a minute and go, okay, what are we doing with this verse and this story? Like, are we just going like, hey, it's mythology and it's just trying to teach us some deeper principles, and so we just kind of put it's like Jonah and Zeus and whatever, Harry Potter, right? They're just kind of the defining mythologies of our generation. Is it that? Or is it kind of a parable where something like it kind of happened, where maybe Jonah rode on a fish? I don't know. It was something similar, but not exactly this. And we kind of go, all right, let's again kind of put out of our heads the reality of this, suspend disbelief for a moment, and just go along with what Jonah's trying to tell us. Or the third option, which I think is the only honest option here, given some of what the rest of the Bible tells us, that we have to take Jonah's testimony at face value and then judge it at face value. There's nothing in the text to suggest that Jonah is trying to tell us a story and not just bear witness to something crazy that happened in his life. right? And in fact, the rest of the Bible would double down on that. In fact, in 1 Kings, we read this a couple weeks ago, in 1 Kings, there is mention of Jonah, son of Amittai, as a prophet and some other thing God was asking him to do. So the Old Testament roots the historical nature of Jonah pretty clearly. And then in Matthew, Jesus talks about Jonah and is talking about himself dying and being raised again, and says the only sign you will get is the sign of the prophet Jonah, who was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights and then was released from the belly of the fish. And Jesus says that's a metaphor. That story kind of is predictive or prophetic for me as well. So we have to come at, I think, this story and take it at face value and go, okay, either it happened or it didn't happen, but let's not do this mythology thing, okay? Now, the question then is, can we take this seriously? And I want to do just a tiny bit of philosophy class with you because that was like my degree and it's the only time I get to use it, and so I'm sorry. But philosophers talk about this thing called plausibility structures, okay? Or Charles Taylor, a very, very famous Canadian philosopher, if that's trustworthy, called it a social imaginary, right? And he talks about how cultures have social imaginaries or plausibility structures, which are kind of a communal group of ideas that allow us to accept or reject things, right? So an example of this would be when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, there was a series of commercials for cookies, and the main character were Keebler elves. Right, you guys remember the Keebler elves? It was all animated, and these elves made the cookies and then snuck the cookies into your cupboard. And I remember as a kid seeing this commercial and being like, they don't have my address because they have never shown up. I have never gotten cookies from these guys. And I'm gotta be honest, I don't know if I trust elf-made cookies, you know? Whenever I when I was a kid, I would see homemade cookies, and I'm like, who's home? Right? Like, who is making these in their home and why is that a good thing? So there is a sense in which we would hear that story, and because of what we know, all of the facts and all of the things that we know as a culture, we go, well, obviously that's a story and it's not real. Okay? What was interesting, just a couple weeks ago, was Earth Day. April 22nd is Earth Day. Earth Day has been celebrated for now 55 years. And I read an article this week, and believe me, I am not trying to get into any arguments about climate and any of that stuff. So please, just don't. But the article was interesting because it was comparing what the discussion around climate was in 1970, the first year of Earth Day, as opposed to what the discussion is today, 2025, 55 years later. So a couple quotes for you. From 1970, these are Earth Day kind of predictions. Harvard biologist George Wald estimated that, quote, civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. We're doing all right. Stanford biology professor Paul Ehrlich sketched out his most alarmist scenario for the 1970 Earth Day issue of The Progressive, assuring readers that between 1980 and 1989, some 4 billion people, including 65 million Americans, would perish in the Great Die-Off, he called it, which has got a nice ring to it. Peter Gunter, a North Texas State University professor, wrote in 1970, demographers agree almost unanimously on the following grim timetable. By 1975, 5 years later, widespread famines will begin in India. These will spread by 1990 to include all of India, Pakistan, China, and the Near East and Africa. By the year 2000, or conceivably sooner, South and Central America will exist under famine conditions. By the year 2000, 30 years from now, the entire world, with the exception of Western Europe, North America, and Australia, will be in famine. Why? What was so dire? Kenneth Watt warned about the pending ice age in a speech. The world has been chilling sharply for about 20 years, he declared. If present trends continue, the world will be about 4 degrees colder for the global mean temperature in 1990, but 11 degrees colder in the year 2000. This is about twice what it would take to put us into an ice age. So in 1970, we were very concerned about global cooling. And in 2025, we're very concerned about global warming. Again, write your emails. They will be deleted, okay? I'm not interested in that at all. What I am interested in is the idea of plausibility structures. And the idea that in 1970, the prevailing wisdom of climate scientists was that the world is getting cooler, so much so that there will be widespread famine by 1990. Here we are 55 years later, and we have similar kind of alarmism about how the earth is getting hotter, and we are going to have all these problems into the future. My concern is not which is true. My concern is that both have been true in the last 50 years. And that the culture has shifted to such a degree that what was once entirely plausible is now completely implausible, and what was then implausible is now plausible, and everybody goes, well, obviously. And now, 55 years later, if you question or doubt or whatever, you are publicly, at least, kind of branded, you're sticking your head in the sand and you're not paying attention to the real science and what's actually going on, and you're probably a right-wing conspiracy theorist and all this stuff. Again, you probably are. But my point is the shift and how culture shifts to in terms of plausibility and what we would hear and go, well, yeah. And there are a lot of examples of this that I could give. That is the one that gets me in the least trouble. Of the things that have changed in terms of what we would now say, oh, of course, where 25, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, we would go, well, that's ridiculous. One of those things, and why this relates to what we're talking about today, is the probability of something like this story of Jonah has not shifted, because I'll say I was born in 78, grew up in the 80s, grew up in church. I never once heard a pastor get up and have to do philosophical argumentation to make this make sense. There was a plausibility structure in America, in the West, in Oregon, or whatever, where I grew up at least, that was like, yeah, Jonah happened. Let's talk about what we can learn from Jonah. And there didn't have to be a bunch of song and dance at the front end to make your introduction too long, like I am doing now. What's shifted? Well, similar to, I think, a lot of different things that have shifted in our culture, by and large, most of you all, and this is no slight on you or anybody else, but most of us have not done like deep climatology science to understand how this has shifted. Most of us have not done deep kind of exegetical or hermeneutical work to understand why what was once kind of, we can accept this, has now shifted. Most of us don't do that work really in any category other than the experts to whom we give implicit trust to tell us kind of what we should think and how things are changing. And a lot of times that comes kind of through the media, right? And again, not trying to get all in your business here. I'm just saying most of these things, most of these shifts in plausibility happen way up high, not down deep in the weeds. So if you today go, yeah, I don't know if I can handle this, like, Jonah getting swallowed by a big fish thing, great. That's probably not because you've done a deep dive into the scriptures and the background and all this stuff, or a deep dive into the plausibility of rationalistic atheism or whatever the case may be, but it's because the vibe has shifted. That I would argue more of us have been influenced by Family Guy in South Park, or if you're more sophisticated, Bill Maher, or whomever your podcast of choice might be, at a really high kind of societal, cultural level, than you have been shifted by some specific material argument. Okay, I could be wrong, and y'all could be the exception to that rule, but I doubt it. Most of us, especially today in an age of social media, are affected more at an emotional level by things that are primarily aesthetic, rather than being moved at a rational level by things that are significant, laid out argumentation. Okay. So as we come to a passage like this, here's my simple argument. Here's my simple philosophical argument. I mentioned it, I think, 2 weeks ago. If we start with the presupposition that there is a God, or that there is a divine being, or there is some supernatural part of the world, and statistically speaking, 75% of Americans believe in some sort of God, and I think even that is low. When push comes to shove and trouble starts to happen, that number goes up. So if 75% of Americans believe in some sort of divine being, like divine person, then is it so hard to believe that such a divine being could, if it wanted to, accomplish something like this? I mean, if it's in any way God, if that word means anything about power and supernatural ability and all those kinds of things, then I would say, yeah. Like, is it so hard to believe that a God exists, but that God couldn't swallow a man with a big fish? I think you got a bad imagination if you can't think of it. I think if you can't put that together, you have shrunk an idea about what God is to something that I think probably no longer resembles a God. Now, the second question is, would God do this? And we're going to talk about kind of why maybe this happens in Jonah's prayer here. And then the last question you got to ask yourself is, did God do this? So could he, would he, did he? The last one is up to you. But we're going to get into the story because that's a long enough introduction. And I promised the band I'd go shorter this morning. Verse 1. It says, then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, now, pause. I'm going to go back on everything I just said. Is this word for word what Jonah prayed in the belly of the fish? Class? Yes. Dang it. No, probably not, right? Like, this is probably not Jonah in the belly of the fish penning this really poetic, like in the Hebrew, like rhymes, and like that even exceeds my understanding of God, okay? That Jonah could become a poet all of a sudden. Now, is this generally what he was thinking and feeling and praying to God? Yes. We talked about this last week, that this is written as Jonah's story, even if he didn't actually pen the exact words. He is telling this story. This is Jonah's testimony of the, I hope, the craziest weekend of his life, right? And so as he is doing that, he is writing down in reflection, this is what I was feeling. This is what I was thinking. This is what was going on inside of me when I was in this great fish. Okay? So, then Jonah prayed to the Lord, his God, from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. This verse, verse 2, is kind of the summation of this whole passage. The rest of the passage is going to be kind of him breaking apart the summation here of verse 2. Here's basically what Jonah says, his prayer. I called out to the Lord in my distress. He answered me. From the belly of Sheol, we'll talk about what that means, I cried, and you heard my voice. That is the summation of his story. Now, if you remember last week, we talked about how Jonah was running from God, that God brings this storm, that it got so desperate that Jonah had a choice to make. He had a moment on the deck of that ship where the sailors were pressuring him, where he had a choice to make. And he could have done a number of different things. One of the things he could have done is to say, God, I'm sorry, I will follow you. Please relent in this storm. He could have done that. Right? The sailors did it after they threw him in the water. They went, God, please help us. Spare us of this man's life. Spare us of the guilt that we just probably murdered this guy. He could have done that, but he didn't. Jonah, to the very end, was running from God. Running from God to the point that he chose what was probably being thrown to his death. And I have to assume, I think it's only safe to assume, that Jonah believed he was going to die when he was thrown into that water. And that was preferable to him than to repent and follow God. And as crazy as that sounds, there are some in this room who would rather die than submit their lives to God. There are some in your life There are some of you. There have been times in your life that you would rather die and just shut her down than to actually submit to the will of God in your life and follow him wholeheartedly. So, I mean, to see Jonah's story is kind of mind-blowing, to see him tell this story, but that is the moment that he was in. He gets thrown into the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, and at the very bottom of that sea, he cries out to God. He had a change of heart. The reality of his decision began to set in, and he cried out to God. And I wonder what that sounded like. Because it wasn't some fully formed prayer. He's literally at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of feet under the water, and he cries out to God. What does that sound like? Help. That's it. Help. I mean, he's underwater, so it's probably like, technically. But that's all. It doesn't take much. God does not stand far off going, you got a lot to figure out, buddy. You got to jump through a lot of hoops. You need to get this whole theology arranged. You need to be able to say the things the right way that I want you to say. Believe it all the right way. Do all the right things. And then if you get there, I'll be at the top of the mountain to find you, to greet you, to welcome you into relationship. It's not what it is. It's never what it is. Jonah has run from God, been thrown into the sea, rebelled against his calling, rebelled against God at every turn, is now at the bottom of the ocean going, help. God goes, okay. It's a million steps away and one step back. Always one step back. That's Jonah's testimony here. That is the beginning of his confession. Chapter 2, this prayer is his confession of faith, confession of sin and confession of faith. He's going to, in a moment, promise that his life is going to change. This is Jonah's testimony. I don't know if you grew up in church, but I grew up in church, and once in a while, maybe once a month or once a quarter, we'd have Testimony Sunday. And people would get up, and they would tell their stories of, this is where I was, and God saved me, and this is where I am today. And crazy stories. Never swallowed by a fish crazy, but crazy. Radical healing. Radical saving. And I always, as a kid who grew up in church, and my rebellious period was this one summer I thought about being a radio broadcaster instead of a pastor. And the Lord humbled me, I mean, it was a hard summer. But I kind of lamented having a boring testimony. That God has just been with me and walked with me. My life is full of sin and full of rebellion, but not in anything fun or interesting. And so Jonah gets up and goes, this is my testimony. I was at the bottom. The belly of Sheol, he says, I cried. Sheol was a Hebrew phrase that often meant hell in the most literal sense, but darkness and chaos, and it was a place away from God. And he says, I was literally at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. I was metaphorically in Sheol, the farthest place that I could be away from God. And yet, I called out to him from that place, and he heard my voice. We're not even into this passage yet, but I just want to tell you right at the front, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter how far you've run. It doesn't matter what depths of despair you are in. He will hear your voice. And all it takes is help. That's it. That's it. Jonah is testifying to that. Now, he's going to unpack this. And again, I want us to remember, he is looking back on this experience now from some months or years ahead, looking back. And when you look back, you get a little perspective. So verse 3, he says, for you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Now, what's the interesting part of that sentence? You cast. Jonah, now months, years apart from this story, looks back and go, it was God. It was God the whole time. God that gave me this calling, God that sent me to Tarshish instead of Nineveh, God that got me on this boat, God that sent the waves and the storm, God that sent the sailors. It was God who threw me into the water. It was God that saved me at the bottom of the sea. It was always God. It's a crazy thing. I talk about this with my wife all the time because my brain is always in the future, always. I wake up thinking about what we're doing 5 years from now. I think about that for this church. I think about it for our lives. I think about it for our kids. And I'm terrified. And I'm always in the future. My wife is thinking about 1 second ahead. And then 1 second, and then 1 second. She is the most present person in the world. And I'll just tell you, if you ever see those motivational posters about being present and all that, don't. It's terrible. There's no planning ahead whatsoever. It is just what is happening right now. And what we've realized is that when we're thinking about the future, it's full of uncertainty. There's full of unknown. The future, it's cloudy. We don't know what is coming down the road at all. When we think about the present, we think about the decisions we make, the choices we have, the control we have over our immediate environment. And it's not until we are in the past, that something is in the past, that we can actually reflect on what was actually happening. And Jonah looks back and sees God's providence. He sees God's providence. He can tell that story. And I would say this, so can we usually. Right? Like, think about some pain that has happened in your life or in your history. Some of us have that maybe 4 months ago. We're still living it. But everybody in here, if we went around the room, could tell a story of something really painful that happened in their lives that in the moment, when you're in the middle of it, just feels terrible and you can't get out of it, you can't see anything. I always think about when something really painful is happening. I don't necessarily mean physical pain, though it can be, but when something is really painful and confusing, it just feels like it's just on you. And there's no escaping. It's just too close to you. You're too in it, and you don't have any perspective on it. And I will say this, as I get older, my eyes get worse, and my kids hand me a phone and go, "Look at this, Dad." And I go, "Nope, I will look at it from out here." And they go, "Oh, you're old." I go, "Yep." And so that distance gives us the perspective, the ability to see things more clearly. And so, again, we could go around the room and tell a story where we go, this was happening, and it was terrible, and I hated it, and I didn't want anything more than for it to go away, but now, wouldn't trade it for the world. It shaped me, it changed me, it altered the direction of my life in ways that I would never want to change. We all could tell that story. So I'd imagine Jonah at the bottom of the ocean, in the belly of a fish, going like, "Get me out of here." And then, maybe months, maybe years later, to be able to go, "Oh, actually, God saved my life. Oh, actually, I wouldn't change this for the world." So in retrospect, Jonah is able to see God's providence. And if we can see it right, and remember it, it actually builds trust for us in the future, that the next time we experience that kind of pain, we might be able to remember, you know what? Last time I had this pain, it turned out to be something I would never change. Is it possible? Is it possible that this pain would be the same? Is it possible that the next pain is the next thing that I would never want to change? But there's the only way we can learn that lesson is to go through the pain, to be able to see it in retrospect, to see God's hand moving in it, and for us to have that trust built in us. To be able to go, I think he could do it again. I think he could do it twice. So Jonah goes, I see God's providence, verse 3. Verse 4 says, then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. Now, I'm sure that this is definitely what Jonah was thinking, that as he is at the bottom of the ocean and then in the belly of the sea, he's mostly thinking, gosh, I hope I get to pray in the temple again someday. Possibly. I also, if he was me, probably thinking about favorite restaurant that he'll never get to eat at again, or maybe some friends and family that he'll never get to see again. So maybe this is a little holier, is what I'm saying, than what was actually all that was going on in this moment. But Jonah, even in that moment, is able to go, hey, my hope is in the Lord. That there is something beyond this, that it's not just this darkness, this pain, this struggle that I'm dealing with now, that he is clinging to hope that God, who has saved him by the fish, would save him unto a restoration of his life. Jonah couldn't be further away from the temple at this point, and yet his prayers were heard. He's at the bottom of the sea. He prays help. The fish saves him. He goes, if God can do that, what more can he do? Verse 5, the waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head at the roots of the mountains. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. Jonah was in the absolute depths of despair. Seaweed wrapped around him. He was just, it is a terrifying thought to be drowning, to be caught up in seaweed at the bottom of the sea and losing your breath second by second by second, as he suffocates, his eyes closing in from the sides, and that desperation to get a breath in that moment of despair, which I think exceeds anything most of us could ever relate to, because that's how bad it got. And I don't always want us to put ourselves in these stories to make them about us, but I think what would be helpful for each of us is to think about what that moment has been for us. What is that moment of greatest despair in our lives? That moment where it just felt like I would do anything to get out of this. I would do anything to change this. Jonah says, yet. Yet and but are the two best words in the Bible. Because the authors use them over and over and over to paint this dire situation. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, just when you think it couldn't get any darker, just when you think it couldn't get more desperate, you see a yet or a but. I can only imagine Jonah being at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, despairing of his life, having made this choice to be thrown into the sea, knowing this was going to end in death, and yet hitting the water and immediately changing his mind and going, what have I done? And to sink deeper and deeper and deeper and feel the pressure of the water on him more and more, the darkness where you cannot see, and then all of a sudden you're getting wrapped up in seaweed and you can't move. And then I want to put myself in the situation to feel a great fish swallow me and be glad. That would be good news. I mean, that's the part that I think we think of the fish as judgment. The fish is salvation. The fish was God saving Jonah. And so now, years later maybe, he can praise God saying, you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. O Lord my God. That he can confess his faith, confess the sovereignty of God. It says in verse 7, when my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. I want to camp on this for a moment, because this is kind of the conclusion that Jonah comes to. As he looks back on his life and this crazy story of salvation, his conclusion is this: those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. In other words, those who trust in anything but God have no hope. Anyone who trusts in anything but God have forsaken steadfast love. We have just given up, turned our back, turned away from steadfast love if we have chosen to follow idols instead of God. In the Old Testament, idolatry is a huge thing. The people of Israel and their surrounding neighbors would constantly be making physical idols out of wood and gold and metals and various things and then bow down and worship to them. And then the New Testament writers pick up this theme and go, listen, just because you've exchanged a carved figure of an idol for something less tangible, that doesn't make it any less of an idol. Your bank account isn't less of an idol than a carved figure. Your spouse isn't less of an idol than a carved figure. Your career isn't less of an idol than a carved figure. An idol is anything that you love, trust, and obey. It's anything that would move your affections in an ultimate sense. That you would profess love for that thing, that you would profess devotion to that thing or that person. And maybe you wouldn't profess it verbally, but your life reflects a devotion to it that everything else suffers the cost. Everything else falls to a lesser degree of value. It's whatever we love. It's whatever we trust. It's whatever we think, the future is going to be okay because this. We have a sense of security because of our bank account or a career or our influence or relationships or whatever it is. That we go, okay, the future is going to be all right. I know there's a lot of craziness happening out there, but the future is going to be okay because I have this. And again, it's often not something we would explicitly say all the time, but when push comes to shove, what do we check? What do we look for? What do we think about? When the future feels out of control, when it feels uncertain, what do we go to? To go, okay, you're going to be okay. That is an idol that you trust. Whatever you love, whatever you trust, whatever you obey, whoever or whatever it is that you believe what they say and do what they tell you to do. This one, I feel like has risen in this last decade or two with the rise of social media and Instagram and TikTok influencers and all this and podcasts and whatever the case may be, the things that we would look to define life for us. That we go, this is who I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is how I'm supposed to talk. This is how I'm supposed to act. I am going to listen to, believe, and obey this person, this group of people, and they're going to define me. And there's a tribal nature to that as well, that I'm in with this person because all these people are in with this person, so now I get to be with these people. And it can be anything from a podcast to your yoga teacher to your finance influencer to your whatever. Whatever gives you that sense of belonging and identity is an idol. Okay, so Jonah now, in retrospect, looks back and goes, none of that saved me. None of that could save me. Try, when you're at the bottom of the ocean, to call out to your money, your power, your influence, your friends, your podcaster, whatever, and see what they do and how they save you. He goes, when you follow vain idols, you give away the hope of steadfast love. Your idols don't love you. They're using you. Every one of them. They're using you. They love themselves. Jonah sees that, but only in retrospect. I don't know what he was running for in Tarshish, but he was running away from God. That much is clear. Running away from the only one who actually loves you, with a steadfast, unchanging, redemptive love. Running away from the only one who is actually trustworthy, who actually holds the future in his hands. The only one who knows who you are, has called you by name, has made you who you are, and has defined who you are. He was running from him. Timothy Keller, in his book Counterfeit God, says, an idol is whatever you look at and say in your heart of hearts, if I have that, then I'll feel my life has meaning. Then I'll know I have value. Then I'll feel significant and secure. That's the thing. Whatever you're chasing, and we're all chasing, that's the idol. And Jonah confronts us and goes, just ask yourself, would it save me? Can it save me? Will it save me? Jonah says the answer is no. Verse 9, Jonah starts making vows. It says, but I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Now, if you know the end of the story, when Jonah says, I will sacrifice to you, and what I have vowed, I will pay, he won't. Like, he won't. But what Jonah does get is the proper order of this thing. And so here's what I want you to see. What Jonah does not do, the whole prayer is to go, God, I'm at the bottom of the ocean, and I promise I will swim to the top. I'm going to swim to the top. I'm going to save myself. I'm going to get myself out of this. And when I get to the surface, then I'm going to be with you, and I'll go back on your mission. It's not what he says. Nor does he at the beginning make a bunch of promises to God. God, if you'll save me, I promise I'll do whatever you say. I'll follow you. I will obey you. I'll go to church every Sunday or like twice a month, and I'll buy a Bible and then put my name on it. But he doesn't make promises to God either. He is in the depths of despair. He simply says, help. God saves him, and then he says, in thanksgiving. With the voice of thanksgiving. Why? Because the order to this thing is always God moves, we respond. God saves, we respond with thankfulness. God heals, we respond with obedience. This is the crazy thing. It's maybe the greatest trick that the devil has pulled about Christianity is if you just only ever watched The Simpsons or Family Guy or whatever, and that was your whole knowledge of Christianity, you would imagine that the story of Christianity, the message of Christianity is do good things and God will love you and accept you. Be a good person and then you can be a Christian. What's crazy is that is the literal opposite of what Christianity is. And yet, somehow, by means that are not particularly intellectual, that has gotten flipped completely to where the normal, the Homer Simpson's neighbor, right, Ned Flanders, that he's Oakley Doklin his way to apostasy. I mean, that's the exact opposite of what the whole Bible testifies to. Jesus literally fought, sometimes physically, whipping people, but literally fought the very message that we got to clean ourselves up and do good things so that we can be accepted. It's the opposite. Jonah gets it. He goes, I was desperate. I had nothing. I asked for help. God saved me. And now out of that thanksgiving, out of that saving, now Jonah starts to go, what I have vowed I will pay. I will sacrifice to you. And even in spite of the fact that he actually won't, he will continue to fail, he will continue to fall short, he at least gets the order right that God has to save him first so that he can be the person that God made him to be. In fact, verse 10 says, the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. Back to mission. God comes to Jonah in Jonah 1:1, goes, this is what your mission is. Go to Nineveh, preach against it. If you could throw the map up here for a second. We talked about this in week 1. Starts at Joppa. He's supposed to go 550 miles northeast to Nineveh, present day Baghdad-ish. Instead, heads for Tarshish, 2,500 miles the other direction, southern Spain. And God captures him somewhere, I don't know where, somewhere in the Mediterranean. Fish swims him? I don't know. Back to the coast there, spits him up, and God goes, go to Nineveh. Missions hasn't changed. You still got the same job. Go to Nineveh. Why? Because that's who God made him to be. That's the mission that God had given him from the beginning, to go and do that. Right? So none of that changes. In fact, doesn't change for us. The order matters like crazy. Ephesians 2:10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. What's that mean? Does that mean that God created us to be good people, to do good things? I mean, kinda, but it's way bigger than that. That he created us, that we are his workmanship, created in him to be the people he made us to be on the mission, to embody Genesis 1 and Matthew 16 and Matthew 22, we've talked about throughout this series, to be the people he made us to be. And so when he saves us out of our radical despair, none of that changes. He is, in fact, saving us for the very life he created us for. And it is by his grace that we can then go and be and do that. He has called that which he has called us to. One more time, Timothy Keller from Counterfeit Gods. He says, if you want God's grace, all you need is need. All you need is nothing. That's the message of Jonah. This hinge point of his story, Jonah goes, all I had was a need to be saved. I was desperate. And in retrospect, he's so thankful for it. We have lots of things. Lots of things. We have need, but a lot of times that need is masked by all the other things that we don't need. Our need doesn't confront us the same way that it confronted Jonah. Now, many of us have had our need confronted. We've been confronted by our need in the last several months, and that's grace. It's a gift from God. But no matter how far away you have run, and I'll be honest, there's not enough time to talk too much about this, but the depths of despair doesn't have to look like heroin addiction and gambling debts. It can look like 50 years of faithfully sitting in a pew. But your heart is far. Your body may be here, but your heart is far, and it always has been. There's lots of ways to run from God. There's lots of ways to hide from God. And it doesn't always have to be as dramatic as Jonah. I've got lots of friends that I grew up with in church that are far from God because their hearts were never near him. Because they never felt the need. They never saw the need. And so they never really reached out for him for salvation. That's the call of Jonah. That's the message of Jonah. No matter what desperation looks like for you, no matter how many miles away you have run, it is always just one moment back. It is just an expression of need. I need you. I need you. And he will save you. He will hear you. He will rescue you. And I'll warn you, he will set your feet right back on the path he had you on so that you can be who he made you to be. That never changes. No matter what your life has looked like, your purpose, your mission has never changed, and it never will. We make a lot of choices, many of which do not reflect the will of God. And yet, his steadfast love remains. And it's the only thing we can depend on. Let's pray. Jesus, sometimes our need has to be revealed to us. Most of us don't hunger except by choice. Most of us don't suffer, struggle in ways that are acute. Most of us in this room, most Americans, are doing pretty good. You have blessed our nation in many ways, blessed our lives in many ways. The consequence of that blessing, though, sometimes is that we don't see our need for you. We don't see that we are being held together by you, held up by you. Sometimes blessing can be a curse because it blinds us to what we really, really need. So, Lord, I would never ask you to bring pain and suffering into our lives. But sometimes we need it. Sometimes we need to have our lives unmasked in a certain way, to be revealed to us just how much we do need you. Just how much we depend on you and maybe don't know it. So no matter where people are in this room, Lord, I know you are next to them, pursuing them, chasing them, blessing them, loving them. And I pray, God, that today you would give them a sense of need, every single one of us in this room, a greater sense of need. That we would see all the areas in our lives that we have been leaning on vain idols and not you. That the ways in which we trust the future and feel secure about the future because of things that aren't you. The things that move our affections, whether that's anger or love or whatever, that move us emotionally that aren't you. The things that we obey, that tell us who we are and what we should do and what matters and what's valuable in this world and what's not, what we should chase, what we should spend our time thinking about and watching. They all just lead away from life, lead to a path of death. And sometimes we can't see it until we are at the end of that path. Lord, open our eyes, let us see before it's too late, so that we might be who you made us to be, experience the joy, the grace that you have offered to us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Like Jonah, we're going to respond. God has moved through his gospel, and it's on us to respond to his move towards us, his love for us. And so we're going to respond in a couple of different ways. We're going to sing together in just a minute. We're going to take communion together. And then after we take communion, I want to encourage you. I'm going to have the band play for just 30 seconds. I would just encourage you to take a moment to think, to pray, and to consider, just to let this stuff get deep on you. Because it's easy to hear this and kind of go, yeah, well, man, that's a big deal. And then just you move on to the next thought and the next idea. And I don't want to do that this morning. So if you haven't grabbed communion supply, Jaleesa is coming around. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23, Paul says, "For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it, said, 'This is my body, which is for you.'" This is the demonstration of steadfast love. Your idols have never died for you. Your idols would never die for you. Your idols are living off of you. Jesus died for you. So take and eat. In the same way, also, he took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." Let us proclaim the gospel together. Take and drink. Before the band plays these last songs, I encourage you in your seats, just take one minute and let the ideas that we've talked about this morning get deep on you. Think about them for your own life. Apply them to your own life. Just take a moment, and then we'll sing.